It was a quiet night in Raleigh, North Carolina. The streets, bathed in the dim glow of streetlights, were nearly deserted. Layla Monroe, a striking woman in her early 30s, drove her midnight blue sedan through the suburban neighborhood, her mind preoccupied with wrapping up her current assignment. She had spent months undercover, gathering intelligence on a local criminal network that, unbeknownst to most, had deep ties within the city's law enforcement. Tonight was supposed to be her last night in town before making a clean exit. She slowed at a stop sign, coming to a full halt. Years of experience had honed her instincts, and she never missed a detail. She exhaled, ready to make her final turn toward home, when red and blue lights suddenly flooded her rearview mirror. Patrol car. The wail of a siren broke the night's silence. Layla's heartbeat remained steady. She had been trained for situations like this. Calmly, she signaled, pulled over, and retrieved her license and registration from the glove compartment. Two uniformed officers stepped out of the vehicle. The taller one, Officer Greg Maddox, exuded an air of arrogance. His stockier partner, Officer Daniel Briggs, followed closely behind. Layla took note of their body language. Confident, aggressive, and just a little too eager. Something was off about this stop. It had the stench of premeditation. Maddox leaned into her window, flashing a smug smile. "Evening, ma'am. You know why we stopped you?" Layla met his gaze evenly. "No, officer. I wasn't speeding, and I made a full stop at the intersection." Maddox chuckled, shaking his head. "That's not how we saw it. Step out of the vehicle." Layla tilted her head slightly. "Is there a reason for this request?" Briggs stepped forward, grinning. "We have reason to believe you're in possession of illegal substances." Layla's eyes flickered to Maddox's hands, now resting on his belt. This wasn't a random stop. It was a setup. A deep-rooted instinct in her gut confirmed what she already suspected. The timing was too perfect. She was supposed to leave town tonight, disappear into the ether. Only a select few knew her plan, and yet here she was, pulled over under dubious circumstances. The realization sent a cold prickle down her spine. Despite the unfolding trap, Layla remained composed. She had played this game before. Many times in many different roles. She was no ordinary civilian caught in a bad situation. She was a seasoned intelligence operative, trained in deception, observation, and tactical countermeasures. But none of that training mattered if she couldn't turn the tables before it was too late. Maddox's smirk widened as she hesitated. "Problem, ma'am," he taunted. Layla knew the rules. Comply now, control the narrative later. Slowly, she pushed open the car door and stepped out onto the pavement, the cool night air wrapping around her like a silent warning. Briggs circled the sedan like a predator toying with its prey. He tapped the trunk lightly, exchanged a knowing glance with Maddox, and let out a low whistle. "Guess we should take a look inside, huh?" Maddox nodded, turning back to Layla. "Mind if we take a look?" Layla didn't flinch. "Am I being detained?" Maddox's smirk faltered just slightly, but he recovered quickly. "Let's not make this difficult." She exhaled sharply, calculating her next move. "I do not consent to a search." Maddox shrugged, exchanging a look with Briggs. "That's fine," he said, his voice feigning reassurance. "We have probable cause." Layla watched in silence as Briggs popped the trunk. Her eyes darted to Maddox's fingers, which twitched ever so slightly. He was anticipating something. That's when she saw it. A small, unmarked bag, nestled conveniently near the edge of her trunk, in plain sight. Layla's jaw clenched as she realized the extent of the setup. This wasn't just about getting her off the streets for a night. This was a takedown. Someone wanted her out of the picture, badly. But who? And why now? Maddox let out a low chuckle, shaking his head. Well, he said, pulling the bag out with exaggerated theatrics. "Looks like we got ourselves a real problem here." Briggs folded his arms across his chest. "That's possession with intent to distribute." Layla inhaled slowly, keeping her emotions in check. Anger, fear, frustration. None of it could be allowed to surface. Instead, she lifted her chin slightly, an almost imperceptible smirk playing at her lips. "You're making a big mistake," she said quietly. Maddox grinned, snapping handcuffs onto her wrists with a little too much force. "Yeah, we'll see about that." As they led her toward the squad car, Layla did the one thing they didn't expect. She smiled. Because she already knew how this would end. Layla stepped out of the car with calculated precision. She had dealt with men like this before. Overconfident, power-hungry, and reckless enough to think they were untouchable. Briggs popped open her trunk with an exaggerated flair, then let out a dramatic whistle. Well, look what we have here." Inside was a small, unmarked bag of white powder. Layla's expression remained unreadable, but internally, her mind was working at lightning speed. That bag had not been there earlier. Maddox smirked, gripping the bag between two fingers. "That's possession with intent to distribute. Bad luck, lady." Layla's eyes swept over the bag, the way Maddox held it, the way Briggs stood slightly behind him as if waiting for approval. It was a performance. One they had likely rehearsed many times before. Briggs stepped forward, snapping handcuffs around her wrists. "You're under arrest." Layla let them believe they had one. "You're making a big mistake," she murmured as they led her to the squad car. Maddox chuckled. "We'll see about that." The cool steel of the cuffs bit into her wrists, but she barely registered the sensation. Her mind was already 3 steps ahead, cataloging every detail. The squad car's number. The brand of radio clipped to Briggs's belt. The faint scent of stale coffee on Maddox's breath. Every tiny observation was a potential weapon. As they drove away, the rhythmic crackle of the police radio filled the car, interspersed with idle chatter from the dispatch center. Layla leaned her head back against the seat, listening intently. Her people would be searching for her by now. She just had to be patient. Maddox glanced at her through the rearview mirror. "You don't look too worried." Layla met his gaze, a hint of a smirk playing at her lips. "Should I be?" Briggs scoffed. "You talk tough now, but that'll change when you're booked." Layla turned her gaze out the window, suppressing a smile. She knew better. They had no idea what they had just stepped into. They thought they were in control. They were wrong. Officer Ethan Carter sat at his desk, staring at the arrest report in front of him. Something about it gnawed at him. The details were too clean, too convenient. He had been with the department for only a few months, but he had seen enough to know when something didn't add up. He glanced at the surveillance monitors showing Layla in her holding cell. She sat calmly, her posture unshaken, her expression unreadable. Most people brought in on drug charges were either frantic or defeated. She was neither. Scrolling through past arrest records, Ethan noticed a disturbing pattern. Maddox and Briggs had made similar arrests before. Traffic stops leading to convenient drug discoveries, always leading to airtight convictions. His gut told him something was wrong. As the station bustled with activity, Ethan hesitated, his fingers hovering over his keyboard. If he started digging too deep, it could put a target on his back. But if he didn't, he would be complicit in something rotten. Taking a deep breath, he made his decision. He started pulling up security footage from the night of Layla's arrest. What he found made his blood run cold. The trunk had already been opened before Maddox and Briggs had discovered the drugs. He rewound and played it again, his heart pounding. They had planted the evidence. Layla's fingers brushed the inside hem of her jacket, activating a hidden tracker. A signal pulsed, reaching the right people, her people. She didn't need to call for help. They already knew. Across the city, in a secure facility, a red dot blinked on a map. A man in a sharp suit picked up his phone. "We have confirmation. Mobilize the team." Back in the station, Ethan's doubt turned into quiet resolve. He had a choice to make. As he studied Layla's face on the monitor, he knew what he had to do. Layla remained still, her senses finely attuned to every movement around her. The dull hum of fluorescent lights overhead, the rhythmic tapping of a keyboard from the front desk, the murmur of voices in the break room. It all painted a picture of her surroundings. She knew she had limited time before Maddox and Briggs figured out something was wrong. She glanced at the small security camera positioned outside her cell, analyzing its angle. It was an older model, sluggish, outdated. That meant its live feed likely had a small delay. If she timed her movements correctly, she could create a blind spot. Her fingers, still loosely cuffed behind her, carefully manipulated the latch. She could hear muffled laughter from the hallway. Maddox and Briggs were overconfident, celebrating too soon. She counted their steps, listening for the right moment. Meanwhile, miles away, a sleek black SUV wove through city streets, its passengers silent, focused. The team had already intercepted the station's communications, monitoring every call, every radio transmission. A woman in the back seat, tech specialist Olivia Reyes, pulled up the station's security system on her laptop. "We're in," she murmured. "I'm shutting down external feeds now." Her partner, a burly man named Jackson Carter, nodded. "We move in 5. Back at the station, Ethan's internal struggle reached its peak. His fingers hovered over his keyboard as he accessed restricted files. If he pulled Layla's arrest report now, it would leave a trace. If he didn't, he might lose the only chance to prove what was really happening. He inhaled sharply, then pressed enter. Across the room, a printer whirred to life. Maddox's laughter died abruptly. He turned his head, frowning. "What the hell is that?" Ethan's pulse pounded as he quickly yanked the papers free and shoved them under his desk. He knew he had seconds before they caught on. But that was all Layla needed. With a calculated twist, she freed her hands, exhaling softly. The signal had been sent. The game had begun. The police station was alive with tension. Officers moved about, their gazes flickering toward the FBI agents now occupying key positions within the precinct. The arrival of the federal team had sent ripples of unease through the department. Conversations were hushed, phone calls shortened, and glances exchanged between those who feared their own skeletons might be dragged into the light. Layla sat motionless in her holding cell, her posture poised, her eyes sharp as she listened. Every voice, every movement, it was all information. And information was power. Beyond the bars of her cell, she watched Officer Ethan Carter, the young rookie who had first harbored doubts about the arrest, pace nervously by his desk. His fingers drummed on the edge of the keyboard as he hesitated, torn between duty and conscience. He had spent the last few hours pulling records, combing through past cases linked to Maddox and Briggs. What he had found made his stomach churn. Down the hall, in a sterile interrogation room, Maddox and Briggs sat opposite Agent Daniel Price, the federal investigator leading the case. Price was calm, collected, his gaze unwavering as he slid a folder across the table. Inside were surveillance images, text message logs, and witness statements, all pointing to a pattern of fabricated evidence and targeted arrests. "You've been busy," Price said, his voice even but firm. "We have enough here to bring you both up on multiple charges, including evidence tampering, obstruction of justice, and civil rights violations." Maddox scoffed, leaning back in his chair. "You think you're gonna pin this on us? We're cops. We know how this works." Price didn't flinch. "Yes, you do. Which is why you know exactly how screwed you are." Briggs shifted uncomfortably. He wasn't as hardened as Maddox, and the weight of the situation was pressing down on him like a vice. Meanwhile, in the bullpen, Keller hesitated no longer. He gathered the compiled records and, with one final deep breath, walked straight to the federal agents. "I have something you need to see," he announced, his voice louder than he intended. The room turned silent. All eyes were on him now, but he no longer cared. Minutes later, Layla's cell door buzzed open. Agent Price stepped inside, nodding toward her. "You're free to go." She rose smoothly, stepping past him without hesitation. "I assume they're not," she asked, motioning toward the closed interrogation room. Price's lips twitched in a small smile. Not a chance. As she walked through the station, Maddox and Briggs were led out in cuffs, their once smug expressions replaced with a hollow look of men who had just realized their reign was over. Layla met Maddox's gaze one last time, and this time it was her turn to smirk. Outside, the crisp night air greeted her like an old friend. She took a deep breath, savoring the taste of victory. The fight wasn't over, not by a long shot, but tonight she had won. Agent Price appeared beside her. "What's next for you?" Layla glanced at him, her smirk widening. "On to the next mission." And with that, she disappeared into the night, leaving behind a city forever changed. The aftermath of the arrests sent ripples through the city. News stations ran the story on a continuous loop, each headline more damning than the last. Corrupt cops exposed in FBI sting splashed across every major news outlet. The footage of officers Maddox and Briggs being led away in handcuffs played repeatedly, their once smug expressions replaced with vacant stares of disbelief. Within hours, the Raleigh Police Department announced a full internal investigation. More names surfaced, officers who had turned a blind eye or actively participated in the corruption. The department's leadership scrambled to contain the damage, but the truth was already out in the open. Layla Monroe had done what many thought impossible. She had dismantled a criminal network hidden within the very system meant to protect the people. Layla sat quietly in a federal office building, watching the televised fallout from a secure room. Agent Thomas Price, the lead FBI investigator on the case, leaned against the doorway, arms crossed. "You did good work," he said. Layla exhaled, setting her coffee down. "Took long enough." Price smirked. "Cleaning up a mess like this isn't fast work. But we got them. And more importantly, we sent a message." Outside the police department, community members gathered. Some were relieved, others angry that it had taken so long for justice to be served. Local activists called for further investigations, demanding accountability at every level. A candlelight vigil was held for those falsely imprisoned due to the officers' corruption. People spoke of lost years, shattered reputations, families torn apart by lies. Ethan Carter, the rookie officer who had first questioned the setup, stood in the crowd, watching with a quiet intensity. He had made a choice to do the right thing despite the risks. His name wasn't in the headlines, but he felt the weight of what had happened. The department viewed him as both a hero and a traitor. Some officers avoided him, others whispered behind his back. But none of that mattered. He had exposed the truth, and that was enough. Inside the courtroom weeks later, Maddox and Briggs sat stiffly in their orange jumpsuits as the judge read the charges against them. The list was long: evidence tampering, false imprisonment, drug trafficking, abuse of power. Their lawyers tried to argue technicalities, but the weight of the FBI's investigation crushed any hope of leniency. Maddox's face was hard as stone, his eyes darting between the prosecutors and the judge. Briggs, on the other hand, looked defeated, shoulders slumped, hands clasped together as if silently praying for mercy. When the guilty verdict was read, neither man spoke. The courtroom erupted, some in cheers, others in tears. Justice had finally been served. Layla sat in the back of the room, unnoticed. She didn't need to be seen. Her work was done. As she stepped out into the cool afternoon air, she felt a familiar sense of closure. Agent Price joined her. "Where to now?" he asked. Layla smirked. "There's always another fight." The case of Maddox and Briggs was a stark reminder of the fragility of justice. Power when unchecked leads to corruption. But the most important lesson: one person can make a difference. Layla Monroe, armed only with intelligence and persistence, had exposed the truth. Officer Carter, a young cop who dared to question the system, had helped bring it down from the inside. For the community, the case proved that silence enables wrongdoing. People rallied, demanded change, and ensured that the department faced real consequences. Laws were revised, oversight committees strengthened. The city had been shaken, but in that destruction, something stronger was built. For Layla, This case was another chapter in her life's work. She had walked into the lion's den and walked out victorious. But she knew corruption didn't end with one case. And neither did her mission. As long as injustice thrived, she would be there to fight it. Because justice isn't just about catching the bad guys. It's about ensuring they never rise again.